What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 3 of Faux Football. This is the very real podcast about everyone's favorite fake sport, fantasy football. I'm your host, Chu. You can follow me on Twitter at Father Dynasty and check out the website, fatherdynasty.com. That's my Substack with articles, this podcast, of course, and also a link to my rankings, which are over at Fantasy Pros. And excited, we have week 1 behind us. Hopefully all of our fantasy teams won, or at least most of them, for those degenerates that have multiple, myself included. And looking forward to week 2, looking to build on what was hopefully a strong week 1 performance, or if it was pretty terrible, and hope to bounce back. And a couple of things we'll be talking about this episode. Stay calm is the first one. That's kind of covering some of these poor performances from players in week 1 that we expect to bounce back. Flex and bust out, a couple of players that are running backs and wide receivers a little bit further down the week 2 rankings, but that could be flex worthy. And a little bit of this or that, some of which are kind of start sit, and some of which are likely both would be starters, but one that I think will perform better than the other in week 2. But with that being said, let's get to Stay Calm.
It's a procedure. Stay calm! Wait. Everybody calm down!
Staying calm, something that always seems to be difficult for fantasy football, especially after week 1. I look back, and it's funny to think of the tremendous week 1 performances in the last couple of years that we forget about, certainly once it's season to end, and it will be very much the same this year, I would imagine. And I will start off with, it's two players per position, ones that, stay calm. I'm optimistic that, the ship will be righted. We'll go righted. And for the first one at quarterback, and I do actually have a couple of Bengals here. So first one is Joe Burrow. So still at 8.8 points and only 23 passes. So, not a lot of passing volume there for Cincinnati. Didn't throw any interceptions, no turnovers, so that is good on week 1. But the hope is that going to Jacksonville, or playing Jacksonville, but home game, will be beneficial for Burrow and that entire Cincinnati offense. I know they've been plagued with the last couple of years of having very slow starts and kind of having to claw their way back, which they have done multiple times. But the assumption was a healthy offseason for Joe Burrow. He's getting the full offseason, connecting with his players, of course, keeping Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. All of that was presumed to be a good start to the season. Wasn't the case. And again, Joe Burrow did not have the worst quarterback performance, but certainly by his standards of seeing him as, at worst, a top 10 quarterback weekly, I think that was certainly a disappointment, but hopefully it will be picking up. Again, playing Jacksonville in week 2, I have him currently, and again, these are subject to change as we get closer to the actual game starting on Sunday, but I have him at quarterback 6, so we'll see what happens this week. The next quarterback is Dak Prescott. So someone who dealt with injury last season and has had a couple of injuries throughout his career at this point. But 7.8 fantasy points in week 1, not quite even 200 passing yards, no touchdowns though, and a very tough matchup there in week 1 with a division rival. Week 2, another division rival going against the Giants, but a little more optimistic with how this is going to go. Giants defensive line, pretty tremendous at least in terms of name, notoriety, with Sexy Dexy and the Brian Burns and the litany of pass rushers that they have over there. But, we'll see what happens with this Cowboys offensive line. I would like to believe, based on what happened last week and with the Cowboys and in the separate game with the Giants game, that I think Dak Prescott will have a little more room to breathe. Of course, he will force feed CeeDee Lamb, as we expect. George Pickens could be elevated a bit, as he might have more opportunity with Dak having some more time. So hopeful for that. I have him as quarterback 12 going into week 2. And going over to the running backs, Ashton Genty, the rookie phenom, at least for his college career, has not been as tremendous of a start for his professional career. Week 1, 12 fantasy points, and this is full PPR. 21 touches in total, 40 total yards. Rough, absolutely rough start, especially with the I'm thinking Brock Bowers is going to be out in week 2. Again, I think he did not practice today. Today is Friday, which is when I'm recording this. Released it on Saturday morning. So a little concerned there with that offense. But again, I believe in Geno. I think Jacoby Myers can take a big step forward if Brock Bowers is out. So is Michael Mayer. But, I mean, Gentry's getting the opportunity. So I think, the Chargers are not slouches on defense necessarily. But I have him at RB18. That's the reason why I've had him slide down a bit. I think the opportunities will be there. But I do think that they're going to need to be passing the ball a lot going up against a very high-scoring, high-powered Chargers offense that we saw in Week 1. So optimistic for his opportunities as a whole, but what he's going to do with them, I'm not too sure yet. So I want to see a week or two of more sustained production to be able to kind of have him crack the top 10, top 12. And the second running back is Tyrone Tracy. Big fan of his, but a very slow start, 5.5 fantasy points in Week 1. Not getting much room to work, but did lead the backfield in touches fairly handily, even though it was mostly switching to through the air with that offense. 12 touches, 35 total yards. But again, optimistic for Week 2, and that being going against the Cowboys, as I mentioned, with Dak Prescott going against the Giants, is, it's Tyrone Tracy's backfield. Cam Scatterbo got a little bit of work there, but it was mostly him having an incredible blitz pickup and then catching a pass close to the sideline and trucking someone over, which was awesome. Don't get me wrong. But from a fantasy perspective, this is Tyrone Tracy's backfield, and he's got the upside there. So have him as the RB25 going against Dallas. And I do think he can rise from there. He's one on this list that I do actually think I might have him climb a couple of spots. But there's a couple of other backfields that I have even the second running back elevated a bit, just with how their matchups are. So we'll see there. Wide receiver, first one, and we saw this one early in Week 1, and that was A.J. Brown getting his single target and catch for 8 yards, so 1.8 fantasy points. Man, I mean, I know there's already the concern of he's getting slightly older. He's already always been a tremendously efficient wide receiver, a good touchdown rate, so he doesn't need the 150 targets and what have you to still be a top 12 wide receiver for fantasy. But man, one target in the fourth quarter is not not a way that you want to see a season start. But again, I do think that was a function of how the game was flowing, and again, the Eagles got the win. But I do think going into this next week, going against the Chiefs, that's going to be interesting. But I'm optimistic at a minimum that, whether it's, I think this week, yes, more than 1.8 points, but also I do think his opportunity grows throughout the season. I think they're kind of settling in, and while that offense in Philly does still flow primarily through Hurts and Saquon on the ground, Hurts is also a fairly efficient passer, and I think what they do with the rushing game opens up opportunities through the air, and I think that's really going to help A.J. Brown's touchdown production. I don't think it'll be super volatile like a Gabe Davis. I think it'll be relatively a bit more consistent, close to double-digit touchdowns on the year. So, yeah, hopefully first one will be here against Kansas City, and that I do have him as wide receiver 12 on the week. Might bump him back a couple of spots, but I still definitely see him in the teens at worst. And the second wide receiver is Jamar Chase. Of course, I told you that I was going to be mentioning another Bengal here. 4.6 fantasy points. And, man, I mean, either way, that just the Bengals offense as a whole just was not clicking necessarily in Week 1. Not doing tremendously well. But, again, they have a very strong matchup going against the Jaguars. I think that Chase will at least get more of the target share and being able to create more after the catch. And I think that Jaguars defense is in for a very rude awakening after they got the cakewalk that was the Carolina Panthers offense in Week 1. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those guys, Joe Burrow obviously, are going to, I think they're just going to boat race them. And I know that the Bengals, as I mentioned with Joe Burrow, traditionally getting off to a slow start in the season, but optimistic that slow start is maybe restricted to one game, or maybe one game trickle into this game a little bit, but they pick it back up. I really think that this Bengals team is going to be very formidable throughout the year. And into the final position, last but not least, and that is tight end. And Mark Andrews is the first one I got here. 1.5 fantasy points. I believe that was on one target and one catch, obviously. Man, I really did not see the glow up of Zay Flowers coming. Not that he isn't their wide receiver one, but just kind of how the ball would be distributed. Did not expect that necessarily. But what we've got here is I have him pegged as the tight end 11 in week 2. Going up against the Browns, I do like Mark Andrews' touchdown upside, his opportunities, and I do think that, again, I think the Ravens are going to beat the Browns pretty handily. But again, the hope would be that Andrews is able to elevate that target share, even if it's popping up to 4 or 5 targets, but getting an opportunity to get a touchdown in there. I think that will work wonders for him and get him in the top 12 of tight ends instead of tumbling way down with 1.5 points. And the absolute last one on this list, someone who I was super high on going into in the offseason once the move was made, and that's Evan Ingram. 5.1 fantasy points in week 1. So again, comparatively, tremendously better than Mark Andrews. But still, I think probably a little disappointing for some. And the thought was, he's going into a Sean Payton offense. He's an uber athletic tight end. He can be used creatively. And considering the lack of maybe super high impact pass catchers over there, probably outside of Cortland Sutton, they got rid of Devon Vele. Who's going to step up? Is it Pat Bryant? Is it Troy Franklin? Is it Marvin Mims? And, I think it was a down week in week 1 as a whole for that Broncos offense. And optimistic that Evan Ingram is going to, as far as I know, he should be playing in week 2. So again, maybe revise this if the injury ends up being more serious than it seemed to be. But should be ready for week 2. So I have him pegged as the tight end 13 going up against the Colts. Again, Colts defense does look pretty strong. Good linebacker group there. But optimistic again, the creativity of Sean Payton in that offense, the athletic ability and ability to make all those throws with Bo Nix, and again, Evan Ingram, someone who can be used creatively in a Sean Payton offense. I think very well crafted for that offense there. And that does it for Stay Calm. Again, hopeful that these players that we have on the list here are going to right the ship in week 2, be a bit more productive, and remind us why we drafted them as high as we did. And that is it for that. So now we're going to go over to Flex and Bust Out.
I'm going to flex and bust out of here.
Flex and Bust Out. This is looking at running backs and wide receivers outside the top 36 of Fantasy Pros consensus week 2 rankings. So that's for each position outside the top 36. And it's kind of my way of plucking some players and saying, hey, these are probably some slightly deeper players if you're in kind of a traditional, Yahoo, ESPN redraft fantasy league, where you're going to need to be picking between a couple of these players and who are maybe the ones that you should look at in week 2. So comparing it to week 1, I had Nick Chubb, Dylan Sampson, and Ollie Gordon. Nick Chubb literally just finished outside of that. He finished as RB37. And Dylan Sampson, tremendous week 1, finishing as the RB9. And Ollie Gordon might as well not even showed up, RB66. That was a no-go, much like was the entire Miami Dolphins offense. And for wide receivers, Deebo Samuel finished as the wide receiver 6. And again, this is being recorded on Friday, so after another stellar performance in week 2 for Deebo. And Matthew Golden was my next one there and finished as the wide receiver 83. Again, mentioning Deebo there, Matthew Golden was very close to a couple of big plays there on Thursday Night Football, but week 1 was pretty uninspiring for him. And Rashad Bateman was my third one, and ended up finishing as the wide receiver 91. Again, as I mentioned, with the Mark Andrews segment there. Zay Flowers, it was very much his show and the Derrick Henry show, and they performed it well. And Rashad Bateman, again, very much the touchdown upside guy whenever he gets that opportunity with the Lamar Jackson connection. But for week 2, I've got a new trio of running backs and wide receivers. First, for the running backs, Ramondre Stevenson. He is ranked as RB38 going up against the Dolphins. Again, there was the talk of maybe switching up the split in the backfield for New England, presumably meaning Trevion Henderson's getting more touches as a whole, which would not be terribly shocking. Again, for as plotting as Ramondre Stevenson can be sometimes, he offers something that, Trevion Henderson doesn't necessarily have in that just physicality and frame and size. So I really do think it's still, throughout the season, unless something dramatically different happens, maybe ball security issues with Stevenson, it's going to be a thunder and lightning. It just might be a little more lightning than thunder as we get through the season. Henderson has proven to be dynamic, and I do not think he's going to take over say, a bell cow type of role in that offense, but I do think he can take on more of a role than he initially had in week 1. But Ramondre Stevenson, that Dolphins team as a whole was just tough to watch in week 1. And I think this Patriots offense, again, the O-line is still a drastic work in process, but Ramondre Stevenson, I think, could have some touchdown upside here as the Patriots offense is simply clicking a little bit better. And next up, Trey Benson, RB 39 in the week, going up against the Carolina Panthers. This is mostly, he got a little bit of work behind James Conner last week, and I'm very big in Conner this week. He and actually Chuba Hubbard having tremendous finishes planning to for week 2. But Trey Benson, I do think he might get a little bit of run here, and I think with that home run upside that he's got, this Carolina Panthers defense is very susceptible to home run plays, whether it be on the ground or in the air, probably unless it's to J.C. Horn's side. So, again, when you're getting this deep into the rankings, you're kind of going, some of them are going to be the boom-bust guys that you just kind of hope for the best for. And speaking of, the third one I got here is Bashal Tutin, and he is the RB 49 going up against the Bengals. The defense is not tremendous there, and I know that Travis Etienne, someone who I have highly ranked for week 2, as he took over a pretty good share of the work in that backfield there for week 1. But with Tank Bigsby gone, Bashal Tutin is elevated. So is the Quentin Allen, but I think Bashal Tutin is they drafted him where they did. He has that home run speed, home run ability. As long as ball security issues are not an issue, truly, for him, then I think that he could get some work. And with that home run speed, I think that anything is possible. Going to the wide receivers, first one, Keenan Allen, wide receiver 38 on the week in the consensus rankings, and going up against the Raiders. I don't think that last week was necessarily a fluke for him. And again, looking at how pass happy that offense was, I'm very optimistic, but mostly optimistic with McConkey and Allen. I think Quentin Johnson, his fantasy production could end up being a little more volatile with the touchdown variance there. But Keenan Allen looking like his old, or I guess young self. As long as he's able to, knock on wood, stay free of injury, I think he's going to be a welcomed addition to this this offense, and could very well finish as, top 24, top 30 wide receiver on the season. Next up, Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver 53 on the week. Again, I mentioned Ramondre, but Boutte going up against the Dolphins. Again, that secondary was already not tremendous and actually had added some injuries throughout week 1. So something that's a weakness getting a bit weaker there. And Boutte stepping in. I still am more optimistic about Diggs from a fantasy perspective going into week 2. But in terms of picking someone who is going to be outside this range, and picking Boutte, I think he could still get a good target share and be someone who can sneak into the top 36 there. And last but not least, I've got Calvin Austin. He is the wide receiver 60. And they are going up against the Seattle Seahawks. There was some talk, I think, of some injuries on the defense there, and both of which I wanted to say were in the secondary. So Calvin Austin, I think, has grown his role as he's been there. And I think DK Metcalf is a tremendous outside receiver. I'm not saying Calvin Austin is the slot version of DK in the sense of his level of ability in the slot, but I think he's improved each and every year. He's got a competent quarterback. I understand how old Aaron Rodgers is and how less mobile he is, but the arm and the thinking and everything like that is absolutely still there. And, I don't know if we're going to see another 4-touchdown game necessarily this week. I do think that Calvin Austin's going to be a PPR darling this season, and outside of, tremendously difficult matchups. And I think that this is one that Calvin Austin can take advantage of and get his 6 to 8 targets and work across the middle of the field and do his best. And that does it for Flex and Bust Out. Hopefully that many of you listening here don't even have to go as far as I'm talking about in the rankings to have players to throw in the flex, but God forbid if you do, go ahead and consider some of those players, check your waiver wire and see kind of what you're working with there. But with that being said, let's go to the third and final segment in this episode, and that's going to be This or That.
No, this or that.
So this or that, as I mentioned off the top here, it's looking at a couple of players who, these might be who you're considering, who should I start, who should I sit, or I'm simply just seeing two players closely ranked that I'm saying one could finish over the other. And really the only one that is one or the other with each one would be the quarterback, because in a lot of the redraft leagues, I would say it's primarily one quarterback. But getting into that, it's two scenarios for each position, two battles, if you will. And the first one I've got is Mac Jones going against the Saints, and that's versus Cam Ward going up against the Rams. Again, I think it's officially official now. Purdy out a couple of weeks, so Mac Jones is going to be stepping in as the starting quarterback for the 49ers, and Cam Ward coming off of a rough week one, and I don't expect it to get a lot better against a pretty strong Rams defense. So I've actually got Mac Jones in here, and I've got him pretty close, double-check my rankings, close to the 24 range, the back-end QB2. I don't think he couldn't be in a better spot. Saints, not a strong defense, and again, I think the 49ers have been good about getting a strong and capable backup quarterback over these last couple of years, as, maybe not planning certainly or believing that their starting quarterback is going to get hurt, but understanding the value. And God forbid if you have to go to that, you have Mac Jones, Josh Dobbs was even a good one. Of course, they've had plenty of others that I think you get someone who is capable to step in and say, I believe that they can operate the Kyle Shanahan offense. And while Mac Jones is dealing with fewer and fewer weapons with George Kittle out and now someone with a last name Tongues playing at the tight end position there, optimistic for Mac Jones, Ricky Pearsall, and Christian McCaffrey to just lift off at this point. And the second quarterback matchup, got Dak Prescott going up against the Giants, and we've got Drake May going up against the Dolphins. Both of these are ones I've talked about to this point in various ways, but again, matchups are fantastic. I certainly like Drake May's matchup better than Prescott's. But so kind of to that end, I'm going to lean Drake May going up against the Dolphins. As far as I know, he's going to have his full list of weapons there. And with Dak, I could very much see Dak having a big game. But, when you think about it, there's always that element of a division rivalry. What is that going to mean for the Giants defense? Are they going to pick up the pieces and actually that defensive line be as good as they should be with the names in that room? So again, both players I think will do well, but I do think Drake May will edge out Dak Prescott here in week 2. Running backs, this one is pretty easy for me. I've got Chuba Hubbard going against the Arizona Cardinals, and DeAndre Swift going up against the Detroit Lions. Again, DeAndre Swift's former team, so interesting storyline there. Ironic because, of course, DeAndre Swift is now playing for the former OC of the Lions. But DeAndre Swift, I thought he looked pretty good in week 1, but Chuba Hubbard, it's his backfield there. Rico Dowdle got even less work than I thought that he would. That offense as a whole didn't look great, but Chuba Hubbard and Teteroa McMillan, I think, were basically the lone bright spots there. And I don't think things are going to be any more difficult for Chuba Hubbard here in week 2 going up against the Cardinals. I think he's going to have another at least in the teens for fantasy points. I think he could creep into the 20s depending on touchdown production and the number of catches that he's getting there. And the second matchup, we got Ashton Genty against the LA Chargers and Travis Etienne going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of these have kind of indirectly been spoken about. I know I talked about Genty a little bit already and kind of Etienne a little bit as well. But optimistic for Etienne going up against a pretty rough defense in the Bengals. I do think it's going to be the Jaguars needing to pass a bit more. But again, that's everything that's been talked about in the offseason and how he's been used thus far. he got the lion's share of the work, including getting some of those targets there. So I do think he's going to be the one running that backfield. Same thing with Genty. I mean, it's his backfield. I'm not seeing anyone that's behind him that's going to take any meaningful touches away. But I'm waiting to see him kind of get his NFL legs under him, if you will, and turn those highlight plays into sustained fantasy production. And it's a tough matchup against the Chargers. So could be good if we're seeing the college Ashton Genty stepping up to the NFL level. But Travis Etienne has showed us what he can do. We know how much the Jaguars believe in Travis Etienne after moving Tank Bigsby. So going Travis Etienne there. And week 2 for the wide receivers, and got Ricky Pearsall going against the Saints, and then we got Hollywood Brown going up against the Eagles. Of course, already spoke a little bit about the 49ers earlier, and I mean, massive Ricky Pearsall fan. Love this matchup. I think there actually were even a couple more injuries to the Saints defense going into this week, which that didn't need to happen for this to be a good opportunity for Pearsall. I think he showed us what he can do the last 2 games of last season, and you're seeing what he could do in week 1. And considering even if his target share were to grow a little bit, a couple more targets there would be fantastic. On the flip side, you see Hollywood Brown, somewhat out of necessity in week 1 with Xavier Worthy going down, getting 16 targets, and not expecting quite as big of a target number for him in week 2, but going up against Philly, it will not be a walk in the park, so to speak. And so less targets, and really for the number of receptions he had, the yardage he was able to produce was not that tremendous. I don't think it's going to be a good week for Hollywood. His only benefit would be that PPR upside of if he gets, 8, maybe 10 targets and is able to pull a lot of those in. But I think the yardage is going to be very difficult to come by. So Ricky Pearsall by a mile. And next one up, a pair of veterans and guys we've, again, talked about, as it were. And looking at Keenan Allen going up against the Raiders and Stephon Diggs going up against the Miami Dolphins. Again, I think it's going to be funny to see how long it takes Keenan Allen to more comfortably climb the weekly rankings a little bit. But for me, it's another one to where even if I think Stephon Diggs is truly the wide receiver 1 there in New England, despite Keishawn Butte having a strong week 1, Keenan Allen, even firmly being the wide receiver 2 behind Lab and Conkey, Keenan Allen is just an ageless wonder with what he's able to do. And from a PPR standpoint, love what he does, working over the middle of the field, can get downfield as well. So it's not just the short routes in PPR. He can get down the field and get yardage. So Keenan Allen, absolutely. And last but not least, got the tight end, of course, and a rookie phenom. Got Harold Fannin going up against the Baltimore Ravens and Kyle Pitts going up against the Minnesota Vikings. So it looks as though for the Falcons, we've got, I think Drake London should play. I know Darnell Mooney is back. Casey Washington's out, though, but that's, again, less of a bother because you have Darnell Mooney healthy. And for the Browns, you saw Harold Fannin get more opportunities than David Njoku, who was in a contract year, if I remember correctly. So Baltimore's defense is very good. That's no doubt. But they're going to need, the Browns will need to be throwing the ball. And Harold Fannin had shown, his multiple record-breaking collegiate season last year. He's showing what he did there was no fluke. Again, looked fantastic. I trust Joe Flacco in terms of his ability to distribute to Fannin. I know he's going to have tough sledding in Baltimore. Again, a revenge game for him, I guess. And I guess every game is not really a revenge game if you happen to play for the team. He won a Super Bowl ring there, and a bunch of his money he made in his career was honestly because of his time in Baltimore. So, yeah, I think he'll be fine. But Harold Fannin, I think it's weird to say a rookie after his first game and considering what happened with Kyle Pitts in his rookie season, but since then it's been disappointing. But yeah, Harold Fannin comfortably over Kyle Pitts. And the last one here for this episode, Jake Ferguson going up against the Giants and TJ Hawkinson going up against the Atlanta Falcons. It's a weird one to say, but I'm going Jake Ferguson again. Or not again, but Jake Ferguson over TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson, that Vikings offense as a whole through the air was, just pretty disappointing. And I know it was J.J. McCarthy's first, real, essentially his rookie season this year, having had the injury last year. And by just sheer grit, will, and determination, they were able to get that victory. But it was not pretty from the standpoint of if you were a pass catcher on the Minnesota Vikings and looking for fantasy points, if that's what they actually do. And yeah, for me, Jake Ferguson, I think he's got a pretty consistent role. They did, of course, re-sign him in the offseason, and I don't think that's the reason why he scores fantasy points, but I think there's a comfort there between he and Dak. And I think going up against the Giants, I think he's going to get his steady flow of something between the 5 to 8 target range. And I think with a Cowboys offense that's should only get better, it gets more and more opportunities for him to get downfield, get closer to, if not actually scoring touchdowns. And that's very much, unless you get that uber high target volume tight end, you're really just looking for the guy that's having that weekly touchdown upside and having it be a real possibility. So going Jake Ferguson there instead of TJ Hawkinson. Well, that does it for this week's episode, and I want to say thank you to everyone out there enjoying the articles, enjoying the podcast episodes. Please like, subscribe, follow wherever you're either listening to this, or certainly subscribe over to the Substack where you would get notified of everything from the articles to the podcast, that sort of thing. Thank you for tuning in, and check out the website for anything else. Check out the weekly rankings if you're looking to set your lineups there on Sunday before everything starts. And let me know what you think about this episode and anything you'd like to hear on future episodes over on Twitter at Father Dynasty. So have a good one.